Hello, my name is Alexia Maxim, and I will be talking about the effects of chronic wasting disease on white-tailed deer. Introduction. Since the 1960s, the United States and several countries around the world have been dealing with the lasting effects of chronic wasting disease. Chronic wasting disease, or CWD, is an extremely infectious and fatal prion disease that has and will continue to have detrimental effects on the health and overall population numbers of white-tailed deer. Since there is currently no cure or vaccine, state and federal agencies have taken it upon themselves to help control and keep track of CWD. To do so, they have created and enacted surveillance, research, and management strategies. Our society, along with these state and federal agencies, must work together to monitor and stop the spread of this disease. The history. Back in 1967, a Colorado research facility owned by the Colorado State University was alerted after the captive mule deer and elk populations were experiencing diminished situational awareness and a significant decrease in their overall weight. As time passed, their symptoms got progressively worse, and they eventually died. With the symptoms that were seen by these individuals, the mysterious disease was given the name chronic wasting disease, or CWD. 14 years after its discovery in captive populations, it was then discovered to be affecting wild deer populations. This disease is extremely prevalent in the United States, but cases of it have been found in other countries across the globe. As of recently, the data and research that has been conducted on CWD has brought light to noticeable ecological, economic, and sociologic impacts. So, what is chronic wasting disease? Chronic wasting disease, or CWD, is a fatal and infectious neurodegenerative prion disease that affects white-tailed deer. Additionally, CWD is also known to infect other members of the Cervidae family, including mule deer, elk, and moose. Prions, the main source of chronic wasting disease, are abnormally folded proteins that lack DNA and continuously replicate. These misfolded proteins eventually spread throughout a deer's body and can be found in areas like their brain, spinal cord, or lymph nodes. Chronic wasting disease is also known to be a transmissible prion disease, which will be discussed later on. Having no vaccine or cure, CWD is of significant concern for wildlife management, conservation, and overall public health. By taking the time to understand its epidemiology and impact, we will ultimately be able to help develop effective management and surveillance strategies. Effects on health. When it comes to the effects that CWD has on white-tailed deer health, we often see indirect and/or direct transmission, infection and incubation periods, as well as changes in behavior and physical appearance. The transmission of CWD occurs through two distinct means: animal-to-animal transmission through bodily fluids like feces, saliva, blood, and/or urine, as well as environmental transmission through contaminated soil, food, and/or water. On the other hand, the time between initial infection and the onset of physical signs that a white-tailed deer does in fact have CWD is between 18 to 24 months. However, it may take up to more than a year for any of these signs or symptoms to be noticeable. When an individual does start to show signs and symptoms, there are often physical and behavioral changes. For example, some physical changes could be emaciation, drooping of the ears and/or head, excessive salivation, and problems with coordination and walking. On the other hand, behavioral changes may be like increased aggression, increased drinking and/or urination, decreased interactions with other deer, listlessness, and depression. Overall, we must understand and remember that the signs and symptoms above may be correlated to CWD, but they may also be other illnesses and/or diseases seen in the species. Observations and testing must be done in order to confirm whether this deer is a victim to CWD or another illness and/or disease. Effects on population. It has been a question of concern over the last few years whether chronic wasting disease has a role on the overall health and numbers of the white-tailed deer populations across the United States. To address this concern, one study conducted by Edmonds et al. Hypothesized that demographic rates are altered by chronic wasting disease to an extent high enough to lower their overall population growth. The specific objectives were to monitor CWD positive and CWD negative white-tailed deer in a Wyoming area that was known to have a large prevalence of CWD. With the given area and populations, they wanted to determine demographic and disease indices, including CWD prevalence, annual survival, finite rate of population growth, and many more. After the study was conducted, the data showed that the CWD-positive deer within the study were 4.5 times more likely to die annually than CWD-negative deer. The overall difference in survival by CWD status and the proportion of CWD positive deer to negative in this population helps to explain the declining population trend within the Wyoming study. In conclusion, the results support the numerous concerns that wildlife managers, wildlife disease biologists, and conservationists have had whether chronic wasting disease can negatively impact deer populations. Surveillance, research, and management. As of this time, there is no effective way to eradicate chronic wasting disease from the environment or prevent other individuals from becoming infected. However, state and federal agencies are working together to create management, surveillance, and research strategies to learn more and determine the next best course of action. In one management strategy, hunter education and assistance, state and federal agencies involve and educate their hunters because they are conservation's greatest tool. By involving them in CWD testing and sampling, along with education about transportation of harvested deer, disposing of carcasses, baiting and feeding, testing, we may also be able to stop the human-induced spread of CWD. Another strategy, postmortem testing and research, has been happening for quite some time across the country. As it was mentioned before, CWD prions congregate in areas like the brain, the spinal cord, and the lymph nodes. The only way to test these is through complete removal, which cannot be done unless the individual is dead. Once collected, the samples can be deposited via sample collection sites or head bins, depending on the state. Lastly, the creation of databases allows the public to view past and current information regarding CWD and gives hunters who ultimately submitted deer for testing access the results online. As an example of surveillance database, the Pennsylvania Game Commission has created a CWD surveillance dashboard that tracks their CWD surveillance efforts within Pennsylvania's free-ranging wild deer and elk populations, which focuses primarily on specific areas, seasons, sources, and demographics like species, age, and sex. This dashboard also brings light to the chronic wasting disease management areas, or DMAs, across the state. By collecting samples and monitoring the prevalence of CWD in target areas, it will allow state and federal agencies to determine whether the certain states or country is meeting CWD prevalence objectives outlined in various CWD response plans. Conclusion. Over the last 50 years, white-tailed deer across the United States have been severely affected by chronic wasting disease. Chronic wasting disease, or CWD, is a fatal and infectious neurodegenerative prion disease that has and will continue to have detrimental effects on the health and population of white-tailed deer. These effects may include physical and/or behavioral changes, along with changes in population numbers. In order to monitor and stop the spread of this disease, agencies and our society must work together to create and continue current surveillance, management, and research strategies. Here are the references and credits throughout this video.